And so what is that? Well, how come he's not a spiritual teacher? How come he says, I'm not a guru? You know? So, you see, we have to deal and cope with these kind of seeming contradictions. But once you go into it and examine it carefully, you see that they're truly not contradiction. They only present themselves as contradiction to our way of thinking. Right? And our way of thinking is very image-laden, and that's of course a topic that he addresses very profoundly. And he focuses on the operation of our consciousness. And that our daily life, and that's his concern, right? Our actual daily practical life is dictated by our thought, by our thinking, by our memory, by our knowledge, right? Which all of that you may call consciousness, if you wish. We are conscious beings. We are depending on that. We are, without it, we'd be lying in the dirt, right? So, now, and I say that again, here you get again into that area where there seems to be a contradiction. Because he says, oh, knowledge, thought, and sometimes if you don't examine it carefully, he seems to be saying, oh, all knowledge, all thought, all thinking is trash, throw it out. But he's not saying that either. He's not saying that, you see. Because he's very well aware that we as human beings, as conscious beings, we are dependent upon thought. We need knowledge. And he says that repeatedly. You know, if you need to drive a car, you need knowledge. You know, to speak a language, you need knowledge. I mean, right? All of that is thought, knowledge, memory. We are dependent upon it. So what is he talking about when he says knowledge? Right? What is he referring to when he says thought? I tell you what I think he's talking about. He's talking primarily, and you can check on that too, because sometimes he specifies it and goes into it very carefully, that he's talking about psychological thought, psychological knowledge, right? Psychological memory. And that's the one thing he's concerned with. Because that area that we often, and it's a very subtle area, you see, and that's where the difficulty comes in. Because, as I said, we need knowledge, we need consciousness, we need memory to operate even on the most simple level, clearly. But always this other little thing, the psychological knowledge, that also you may call the me, the I, the self, sneaks in, right? And gives it a tone, and gives it a certain trend. And the trend is toward oneself. Meaning, I am operating from a prejudice, from a pre-formulated notion about, what that person is, who you are, who I am, etc., etc. Okay. So, this, I think, at all times is very important to keep in mind, that when he's talking about knowledge, he's talking about psychological knowledge, the self, the me, the I. And all the detriment that this does. And this is another one, another particular item that is worthwhile considering. Because if one looks at it from a certain area, an individualized area, you say, oh, that's just me, that's just me, my reaction, my prejudice, but there is such a thing as a collective result of that particular knowledge, operation, etc. And what is the result? We can look at it, we can look at human history, right? And what's human history tell us about it? War, right? Destruction. Now, let me give you an example. Christianity, right? Now, what's the basic message of Jesus Christ and Christianity? Love thy neighbor, right? Love thy neighbor. well, what's the outcome of that simple message being stewed in the psychological kitchen, right, collectively? What's the outcome? Hierarchy, organization, dogma, and then worse, persecution, torture, burning of people, large-scale war on a monumental scale, right? We see, you know, I mean, we don't have to go very far. It's happening now, you know. And I mean, one doesn't have to single out Christianity. You could use any other religious organization and you come to that same conclusion, not even conclusion. The fact, you can see it as a fact. It's going on, you know. I mean, maybe we only see certain items that are, you know, presented to us in the news or, you know, make the headlines, you know, Boston killings. But we also know there are drone shootings, you know, in Afghanistan or Pakistan, right? Or all kinds of things, you know. We are doing it, they are doing it, and it's related to that curious thing. And it's sometimes difficult to see how that little psychological entity up here, the me, the I, on a collective level, brings about this horrible destruction, violence, and whatnot. You know. And we encounter it in our own life, day to day, or in the news. So, that leads us to the topic of today, which is really K on love and relationship. Now, those are big words, big topics, right? Love and relationship. Now, I like to just quote one thing in the beginning, and I think once one looks at it closely, you see the fact of it. And it's really a statement that Krishnamurti made many times over. And he pointed out that life, our daily life, the life that we live here at this moment, you know, coming up here, sitting around, walking around, talking to each other. Life is a movement in relationship. It's like a formula, right? Life equals movement in relationship, right? That's a fact. We can look at that, you know, and we can see it. Is this just, you know, some imaginary statement, or is it a fact? And I say it's a fact because we can investigate it, inquire into it, you know, and so on. But now I'm going to divert a little bit, if you don't mind, that is, because I'd like to introduce something else, namely.
Louder. Is the PA system on?
Can you hear me now? Is it?
No.
Maybe a bit louder.
Put it up closer. Put it up.
Oh, yeah?
Your shirt.
Do you think that does the trick?
Yeah, that might help.
Is that better?
No.
In that case, I give up.
Is there a volume on it?
Okay, we are all connected, right?
It needs testing.
Try it now.
Yeah.
Better? 10-4. So, as I was saying, I'd like to, having said all this, that life is a movement and relationship, and the significance, the deep significance of both relationship and love in our daily life, I'd like to divert a little bit by looking at these two concepts, right? And because we use words, right? I mean, that's one of the subtleties and difficulties of language, is that we are using words and concepts, and they are the same. I say love, you say love, you know. But what do you think behind it? What does it mean to you when you say love? You know. Now, my meaning, or what I want to say by love, may be something different from what you say. You know, I love my coffee. right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I love it. Meaning I drink it. I incorporate it. You know, how much more loving can you be? But then I also say, I love you, right? To the girl or my wife. Right? I love you. What do I mean by that? Is that just a cliche? You know, I see it in the films all the time. They're on the phone. I love you. Oh yes, I love you too. Cliche, right? I mean, that's the whole point. Language is such a subtle thing at the same time. So let's not throw it out. We need it. And I mean, look, what vehicle does Krishnamurti use? Language, right? He uses language, he uses words to convey something. But what does he want to convey? He wants to convey a certain insight, something he has seen, something he thinks you also may be able to see. Because through words, but what's the word used for? The word is used to point at something. He says, oh, look outside, the sun is shining, right? Well, and you look outside, you can ascertain this fact. You can see it. Much more difficult to say, be a light unto yourself. Much more difficult to see, true love is freedom. You know, it's not just, look out the window. That is something. What do you mean by love? So here's my diversion now, because I'm going to go to a dictionary. And in this case, I actually brought two dictionaries. And I would like to, now this one is a very rare dictionary. I have to tell you the story of the dictionary itself. You see, it's called the Universal English Dictionary. See this? It's by a man called Henry Cecil Wilde. And Krishnamurti, he loved using dictionary. And he used this dictionary to look up words because it has always very good etymological meanings, right? And then when he met David Bohm, and there would, you're maybe familiar with some of the discussions that David Bohm and Krishnamurti had, and they would talk about up here. There's still some free seats here, or there, yeah. They'd go deeply into the root meaning of a word. And now look at that. Now here are two minds, right? The religious mind, Krishnamurti, meeting the scientific mind, David Bohm. And one of the first things they do in order to meet at the same level, at the same time, is to go to the root meaning of the word. Because they know that if they just say a word, actuality, reality, truth, what do you mean by that? Now Krishnamurti, and you may, I just assume that most of you are somewhat familiar with this work. Krishnamurti had a very poetical way of expressing himself and using language. He used to write poetry, right? He used to write poems. So that always comes through in his talks, in his lectures, this poetical sense in which he also sometimes changes one word for the other, says brain and then mind and then something else, spirit, But suddenly, here's David Bohm, very precise. Oh, what do you mean by that? And so on. So then, curiously enough, they found that both use the same dictionary, namely this one here. David Bohm also used this to look up the meanings of words. And now, here comes the extra little thing. This book was given to me, personally, by David Bohm and Sarah Bohm when they came in 76 or 77. So I'm still using it. So I like to make use of it now, if you don't mind. And if you don't mind, I'll take a seat to read out to you the meaning of the word. Now, this, can you all see, or is it better that I stand? It's okay. It's okay? Okay. Now, the word relationship etymologically is a very, very difficult word to get a hold on. Not only because it's got so many different facets and meanings, but also the word itself, relate, that's the root meaning is relate. Well, it comes from a Latin word that is actually referre, And so here you see the connection to the word refer. Sorry to give you a language lecture here. But more or less it goes to the very root meaning of that word relationship and relate and relation, because it emphasizes that particular meaning, which means to carry back. Referre means to carry back, to bring back. And so I like to read to you, like to read to you the meaning of this word, relationship. Okay, relation from the Latin, relatio, what I just said, a bringing back. Report, narrative. Something related. A tale, narrative. You see, now that's, right, to relate a story, right? That's also the meaning of that word. A tale, narrative, a statement, a setting forth, exposition. Causal, logical, or grammatical connection. Then here, number 3 says, way in which persons are connected with, related to others. Position in, footing on, which they stand to each other. Mode of contact between persons. Now that I think gets close to where the meaning of the word, how we look at it and deal with it now. The mode, what did I say? The mode of contact between persons, right? How we relate to each other, how we deal with each other, how we treat each other, how I look at you, how I speak to you, and vice versa, right? That back and forth, the carrying back and forth means relationship. That movement, it's a movement, right? Now that's important to keep in mind, And that's what society is. There's nothing other than that. You see, all the, when we talk often about society, we are talking so much about, some abstraction, And of course, there are the abstractions, institutions, traditions, right? Endlessly. Laws, and so on. So relation means, in the very basic sense that we deal with it, it means that living movement back and forth between people, right? And now we also know that in that movement anything can happen. Because, and Krishnamurti points that clearly out, he says, look, the way you look at the other guy is very much dependent upon and determined by the memory you have of that person, particularly previous encounters, right? You're married, right? 5 years later, well, you couldn't even write it out in 10 volumes, the image, the memories you have about the other person, all the details, if you have a somewhat good memory. And, but you can see the enormous complexity that is involved in it. And that hints at another thing, which I think is also very important to keep in mind, is that we as human beings, conscious beings, we are so complex. Our life is complexity. Look at the life we are living nowadays, right? In this age, the various modes of communications, how we garner and get information about the rest of the world, about each other. And now we are living in an electronic computer age, and all the spin-offs of all these various things. Now, as I said, in this back and forth of relationship, all kinds of things can happen. The most beautiful thing, of course, is love, what we call love, whatever we may mean. Let's, for the moment, just accept that word and say, if there's that feeling of love from one person to the other, you can't, I mean, I may give it a name and romanticize it. I have a sentimental approach about it. But deep down, it's something of beauty, and it's unspeakable. I mean, that's why there are all the poems, right? About love, about I love you, and you are like the dawn of my life, and you are the flower, and all that, and then all the complications that then arise from it too. So it's complex. Now, Krishnamurti, I think, says something very, very simple. And because it's so utterly simple and so fundamental, we have sometimes an enormously tough and hard time to see that. And to directly see it, not just conceptually, because that's what we usually do. We look at something, a certain fact that he's pointing out, and we conceptualize it and make it into something else, make it complicated, because we incorporate it into our system of knowledge, right? In my own, I have to categorize it. I have to fit it in here, there, rather than seeing this is my life. This is my actual daily life. And so in that relationship that I have with you, or with any person that I come in contact with, and look at, when you think about it, you could give a statistic probably, if you ever were really interested, and you can keep count of this. How many times do you come in contact with, interaction, connection with people you never know, right? The cashier, right? The policeman, right? This and that, the person in the street that you maybe even just see very briefly, totally anonymous. And yet, right, connection, however subtle, however quick, however fleeting. And yet, so we know it's not just love that occurs in that back and forth. There's also all kinds of things. Hatred, right? Discord. You did this to me. I won't forget it. And I have images of people, and the images are like mosaics. They are composed of memories, knowledge, and I react from that, I act from that, I perceive from that too, you see. So, that being said, all of this being said, I like to actually interject something right here at this point. I don't know how many of you were here yesterday when Michael Mendiza gave his presentation. I think it was called On the Teachings. And it was really very thought-provoking and very intriguing and very, I found it fascinating. And I'm mentioning Michael Mendiza because I like to proceed now by presenting to you one of the films that he helped make. And it's called, I don't know if you may be familiar with it, you may have heard of this. It's a series that he did, when was it, in 2002? 2002, Michael Mendiza together, actually the producer of the series was Evelyn Blau, a long-term trustee who dedicated her life to the work of Krishnamurti, and who did enormous, the challenge of change, Krishnamurti 100 years. She did so much wonderful stuff, on behalf of Krishnamurti. So she and Michael Mendiza produced this series called Beyond Myth and Tradition. And it's a 12-part series. It is topically arranged. Each little program is half an hour and consists by a brief introduction by Evelyn Blau, so you'll see Evelyn Blau here. And then there are about usually 4 or 5 clips of Krishnamurti talking on that particular subject. Now, since we are talking here about relationship and love, I thought we might all profit and enjoy this little half-hour thing. So actually, I'll give you 2 half-hour things. The first one is on relation, the second one on love. So can we bring that up, Eric? The first one is the mirror of relationship.
This time, Krishnamurti addresses the question of relationship. What is our part in this most profound interaction with another? In looking deeply, can we see ourselves and our actions clearly? Alone in your room, you may be perfect, but things become more complex once a spouse, friend, child, fellow citizens, and world neighbors enter that space. In 1985, Krishnamurti said, "As you observe in a mirror your face, you observe your reactions without any distortion. And that can only be done in a relationship with another. Relationship, then, becomes the mirror in which you can see yourself exactly as you are." Looking in the mirror of relationship.
Life is a movement in relationship. You may meet in bed, but each one is pursuing different lines. That's like 2 parallel lines never meeting. And this is called relationship, in which there is no actual sense of love. So why do human beings so technologically intelligent such extraordinary capacity and energy, why human beings have not solved this most essential question, problem. You may meditate, you may seek enlightenment, you may follow the latest guru, the latest expression of whatever you are following, but if you have not solved this problem, all your spiritual attainments and technological achievements have no value at all. Because our life is relationship. Similarly, if we have not resolved this essential, basic question of relationship, which is at present isolating it from each other, this isolation must inevitably breed all kinds of misery, confusion, hatred, anger. So is it possible to have a relationship in which there is no conflict whatsoever? To understand the full meaning of relationship with each other, however close, however distant, we must begin to think, we must begin to understand why the brain creates images. I hope we are following each other. Why we have images about ourselves and images of pictures about others. If you have an image as a Swiss or a British or French and so on, do not those images not only distort our observation of humanity, but also do they not separate? And therefore, wherever there is separation, division, there must be conflict. As there is conflict going on in the Middle East, the Arab against the Israelite, the Muslim against the Hindu, the Christian against all the rest of the world. Is it possible not to create an image at all? You understand? That is, not to record an incident which may be pleasurable or painful in that particular relationship, not to record either the insult or the flattery, the encouragement or discouragement. You follow? All that is taking place in our daily relationship, is that possible not to record at all? Are we meeting each other? Because if the brain is constantly recording everything that's happening to it psychologically, then it is never free to be quiet. It can never be tranquil, peaceful. If the machinery is operating all the time, it wears itself out, which is obvious. And this is what happens in our relationship with each other. Is it possible not to create an image about each other? Because that image, the remembrance of things past, which is the image, divides people. It's not only the image, but if I'm ambitious, competing, trying to become chief executive or psychologically something or other, and my wife is also doing something else equally in other directions, how can we have a relationship? You understand my question? Apparently very few of us are free of any form of image. The freedom from image is real freedom. Right? Because then, in that freedom, there is no division brought about by images.
You are my father, and I understand through my watching you that if I am smart, you will like me.
Yeah. You see, the child you talk about depended on the image that his father loves him.
That's right.
And therefore everything goes when his father doesn't love him. Everything is gone, right?
Right.
And therefore he's hurt. Right?
That's right.
Do you impose an image on the child? Because you're bound to, because you have an image.
You're trying to.
Yes. You have to.
Well, no, you're working at it, and the child picks it up or he doesn't pick it up.
Because you have an image about yourself, you're bound to create an image in the child.
That's right. Yeah.
That's it. You follow, you've discovered.
Yes.
See, if the steady process of building an image didn't occur, then there would be no basis for no structure to get hurt. You see, that's the.
Mm-hmm.
See, that, in other words, the pain is due entirely to some psychological factor, some thought which is attributed to me, you see, in saying, I am suffering this pain.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas I was previously enjoying the pleasure of saying my father loves me, I'm doing what he wants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now comes the pain, I'm not doing what he wants, and he doesn't love me.
So if you're this way, I'm with you. If you're not that way...
But you see,
right.
Society is doing this to every human being. Right? Church is doing it. Churches, religions, politics, everything, culture around us is creating this image. I'm a Catholic, I'm a Protestant, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Zen monk, I'm this, I'm that. You follow, they're all images.
Right.
If there is an image of that kind, how can you have love in all this?
Well, we don't have an abundance of it.
We don't have it.
That's right.
See, suppose a parent and child have images of each other,
Yeah.
and the relationship is governed by those images. Now, the question is whether that is actually a relationship or not, or whether it's some sort of fantasy of a relationship.
As long as you have an image about yourself, you have no relationship
That's right.
with another.
All we know somehow or other is images and image making and
And-
thought. That's
and-
all we know.
But
Wow.
we never said, can it stop?
We've never said, can it stop? That's right.
We never said, for God's sake, if it doesn't stop, we're going to destroy each other. The Arab has his image, the Jew, the Hindu, the Muslim, the Christian, the non... You follow?
Right.
Communist. It's this tremendous division of images. Symbols,
Yeah.
all the rest of it.
Yeah.
If that doesn't stop, you're going to have such a chaotic world.
How can it stop?
Not how. Then you enter into the question of systems, mechanical process, which is part of our image making. If I tell you how, then you tell me the system, the method, the
Right.
practice.
Oh, it's all-
I'll do it every day, and I'll get the new image.
Yes.
Now, I see the fact that's going on in the world.
I got it. I'm with you, yeah.
Fact, not my reactions to it, not my romantic, fanciful theories what you should not do. It is a fact that as long as there are images, there is going to be peace in the world, no love in the world. Whether the Christ image or the Buddha image or the Muslim, you follow, there won't be peace in the world. Right? I see it as a fact.
Right.
Right? I remain with that fact. I have experienced something yesterday that has left a mark. That is knowledge. And with that knowledge, I meet next experience. So, the next experience is translated in terms of the old. And therefore, that experience is never new.
So in a way, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the experience that I had yesterday, that I recall,
Recollection, yes.
recollection, upon my meeting something new, that appears to have some relationship to it, I approach on the basis of holding my previous knowledge up as a mirror in which to determine the nature of this new thing that I have confronted.
Quite.
Yes. And this could be a rather crazy mirror.
Generally it is. So, you see, that's what I mean.
Yes, I follow.
Where is the beginning, or where is freedom in relation to knowledge? Or is freedom something other than the continuity of knowledge.
Must be something other.
Which means, it's very, if one goes into it very, very deeply, it means the ending of knowledge.
Yes.
And what does that mean? What does it mean to end knowledge? Whereas I have lived entirely on knowledge.
Yes.
How am I? Take this very simple fact. You insult me or praise me. That remains a knowledge. With that image, with that knowledge, I meet you. I never meet you. The image meets you.
Exactly.
Therefore, there is no relationship between you and me.
Yes, because between us, this has been interposed.
Obviously.
Yes.
Therefore, how is that image to end? Never to register. You follow?
I can't depend on someone else to end it for me.
Therefore, what am I to do? How am I? How is this mind, which is registering, recording all the time, is the brain, function of the brain is to record all the time. How is it to be free of knowledge? When you have done some harm to me, personally or collective, whatever it be, you have insulted me, you have flattered me. How is the brain not to register that? If it registers, it's already an image. It's a memory. And the past then meets the present. So, what place has knowledge in human relationship? Knowledge in the sense, past experience, tradition, image.
Yes.
What has the observer, who is the observer, all that is the observer, what place has the observer in human relationship? Has the observer any place at all in relationship? I say no. The moment he comes into existence, in relationship, there is no relationship.
The relationship is not.
Is not. That's
it's
right.
not something that is in disrelationship.
Yes, that's right.
We're talking about something that in fact does not even exist.
This division is the factor of real violence and hatred. Security means permanency. And is there anything in life permanent? So we are seeking in relationship security and permanency. That very concept, please listen to this for a minute, that very concept of demanding security and permanency is translated as attachment. Right? So there is a deep attachment to another. It may be for a month, for a week, or 50 years. And during the state of attachment, there is all the conflict of jealousy, suspicion, fear, gain and loss, you know. You know all this, don't you? Suppose the speaker or you have not this sense of security and permanency. That doesn't mean anything. Suppose. Then what is relationship? You understand? Permanency and attachment, and with all its pain and pleasure and anxiety and fear, is not love. And if the absence of that entirely, deeply, profoundly, the other is like a flower that's blooming. You may hold the hand of another, embrace another, walk together, but inwardly you are separate from the other. That's a fact. Do face it. And so there's perpetual conflict between the two. And one asks, is it possible to live in relationship with another without conflict? Is our relationship based on memory? If it is remembrance, if it is various images, then all that is the product of thought. Then one asks, is thought love? Do please ask these questions of yourself, not that I'm prompting you. Can there be peace between human beings? Whatever their color, their race, their language, their so-called culture. And to find that peace, there must be peace between you and another. Between you, your wife, your children, you understand? Can there be peace? Which means no conflict. Where there is no conflict, there is something far greater than the activity of thought.
topic of relationship, we've been primarily talking about interhuman relationship, right? Between people, between us, you and me. Right? But now there are all sorts of other relationships, right? How do I relate to my car? Right? It's a thing I use every day. How do I relate to it? How do I look at it? Do I identify with it? Is it mine? Do I keep it clean? Do I care? You know, or my house, my property, my book, right? My money, my bank account. Do I have a relationship to that? Yes, of course I do. You know, I call it mine. It's mine. So that's a relationship too. But now, here's one thing that I often like to point out to people that come here, that Krishnamurti, and it's always very difficult to categorize him, you know. So sometimes one refers to him as a philosopher, right? Even though, and maybe in the deep sense of the word, that is true and accurate, because he liked to say philosophy, the root meaning of philosophy is the lover, the friend. Philos in Greek, where the word comes from, means friend, lover, friend, of wisdom. Sophia is wisdom, you know. So philosophy, the true philosopher is the lover of wisdom, the lover of truth, not some abstract guy, you know, who carries, you know, theories in his mind and tries to give you all kinds of explanations. Right? Now, one thing I'd like to, if one, in that sense, describes Krishnamurti as a philosopher, I often like to point out, look, Krishnamurti is probably the most original and one of the first great philosophers of nature and the environment, right? He, in his daily life, he took and constantly emphasized respect for nature. Love the earth. Take care of it. Don't destroy it. You know. So, and it wasn't just empty talk. It wasn't just words. He really meant it, and he practiced it. You know. Now, there are, of course, in his works, particularly in his diaries, there are some wonderful lyrical expressions of this love of relationship, and in this particular case that I'd like to read a little portion of it out to you to bring that out, that particular aspect of Krishnamurti and his work, and that is the relationship to nature. Do we experience ourselves, and I mean this as a real question, you know, do we see ourselves, do I relate to myself as part of nature, as part of the cosmos, as part of this earth? Do I really sense, feel this, and so on, right? So this particular portion that I like to read to you in that regard, it comes from this book here. I don't know, you may have heard of it or seen it. This is the original, I guess it's the English edition, from Victor Gollancz in 1987. It's called Krishnamurti to Himself, and sometimes it's referred to as his last diary. And in fact, and most of the entries are from 1983, and he did not actually write it. He spoke it because, and I'll tell you why, because by that time, 83, so he was 88 years old, his hand was a little shaky, and he had difficulty writing. So each morning, here in Ojai, here in his bedroom, just down the hallway, you can go to it and check it out. It's called the quiet room now, right? He was in his bed, and he had a little recorder, and he would speak into the recorder every day, made several entries, and this is what came out of it. Later it was transcribed and published in this form. Now, this first entry And it says, Ojai, California, Friday, February 25th, 1983. So 1983, that's exactly about 30 years ago, you know, which brings to mind that Krishnamurti passed away in this house 27 years ago. In other words, almost 30 years ago. So that's to just give a chronological framework. So now here in this first entry, he was actually not talking about, even though it was done here in Ojai, he was not talking about Ojai, but he was talking about a place in India called Rajghat, which is on the Ganges River, the Varanasi, where there's a large school. It still exists. It's a very prospering school. And he reminisces, because he went there each year. He had a place where he stayed, a little house there on the campus, and it was right next inside of the river, and there were some trees, and that's really what he's talking about. So I'll read that to you, if you don't mind. There is a tree by the river, and we have been watching it day after day for several weeks, when the sun is about to rise. As the sun rises slowly over the horizon, over the trees, this particular tree becomes all of a sudden golden. All the leaves are bright with life. And as you watch it, as the hours pass by, that tree, whose name does not matter, what matters is that beautiful tree. An extraordinary quality seems to spread all over the land, over the river. And as the sun rises a little higher, the leaves begin to flutter, to dance. And each hour seems to give to that tree a different quality. Before the sun rises, it has a somber feeling. Quiet, far away, full of dignity. And as the day begins, the leaves with the light on them dance and give it that peculiar feeling that one has of great beauty. By midday, its shadow has deepened, and you can sit there protected from the sun, never feeling lonely, with a tree as your companion. As you sit there, there's a relationship of deep, abiding security and a freedom that only trees can know. Towards the evening, when the western skies are lit up by the setting sun, the tree gradually becomes somber, dark, closing in on itself. The sky has become red, yellow, green, but the tree remains quiet, hidden, and is resting for the night. If you establish a relationship with it, then you have relationship with mankind. You are responsible then for that tree and the trees of the world. But if you have no relationship with the living things on the earth, you may lose whatever relationship you have with humanity, with human beings. We never look deeply into the quality of a tree. We never really touch it, feel its solidity, its rough bark, and hear the sound that is part of the tree. Not the sound of wind through the leaves, not the breeze of a morning that flutters the leaves, but its own sound. The sound of the trunk and the silent sound of the roots. You must be extraordinarily sensitive to hear that sound. This sound is not the noise of the world, not the noise of the chattering of the mind, not the vulgarity of human quarrels and human warfare, but sound as part of the universe. It is odd that we have so little relationship with nature, with the insects and the leaping frog and the owl that hoots among the hills calling for its mate. We never seem to have a feeling for all living things of the earth. If we could establish a deep abiding relationship with nature, we would never kill an animal for our appetite. We would never harm, vivisect a monkey, a dog, a guinea pig for our benefit. We would find other ways to heal our wounds, heal our bodies. But the healing of the mind is something totally different. That healing gradually takes place if you are with nature. With that orange on the tree, just step outside and you can do that. And the blade of grass that pushes through the cement, and the hills covered, hidden by the clouds. This is not sentiment or romantic imagination, but a reality of a relationship with everything that lives and moves on the earth. Man has killed millions of whales and is still killing them. All that we derive from their slaughter can be had through other means. But apparently man loves to kill things, the fleeting deer, the marvelous gazelle, and the great elephant. We love to kill each other. The killing of other human beings has never stopped throughout the history of man's life on this earth. If we could, and we must, establish a deep, long, abiding relationship with nature, with the actual trees, the bushes, the flowers, the grass, and the fast-moving clouds, then we would never slaughter another human being for any reason whatsoever. Organized murder is war. the greatest and the smallest. As in the sea, the biggest and the smallest live. So in this love, everything was. For some weeks now, it has continued. In that state, the observer and the observed, a joint phenomenon ceases. One is no longer observing or thinking, feeling it. But this love, this all-encompassing love is there. It is as though it came from outside, but yet it is not outside nor inside. Such distinctions disappear. At the beginning, it seemed to come from the outside, as my thought feeling had nothing to do with it. But soon it was everywhere. The point of feeling focused in me ceased. And there was only this marvelous state of being. I hesitated for some time to put it down on paper, as I thought it was some passing phase of thought, feeling. But now for some weeks it has continued with extraordinary intensity and beauty, giving to everything, the trees, the birds, the water, the people, a heightened, sharper quality, a beauty that's surpassing. It is living and so eternal, and the mind cannot capture it, nor can memory give life to it, revive it. When they attempt to do that, the beauty of this love ceases. The mind cannot even think about it, for it is a plaything of the intellect. The mind feeling must be entirely still in passive awareness, not expecting, not creating, and then its very concentratedness seems to tear through one, filling the whole space-time with this measureless love. And the next entry that I particularly like, because it's so striking, any of you who go for a walk on the beach may be able to empathize with this. And it says, yesterday I was on the seashore, and this overpowering love nearly made me senseless. It was with the greatest difficulty that I could prevent myself from falling down. It came with the suddenness of lightning, and the lapping of the waves, the green lawns and trees, and the sharp mountains faded, and in this enormous wave of love, everything was submerged. It was difficult to come to oneself, but when one did, life seemed to have altered profoundly. The time-binding quality of thought, feeling seems to have fallen away. There's a peculiar concentrated stillness, but these and other changes are so insignificant and trivial when there is this love of unspeakable beauty. It is the very creation of life, the uncreated. It is an eternal blessing. So, I don't know if that gives you a kind of a description, an intimation, even though, as he says, words can't even hint of it. It's not really. So one can only, I don't know what sense you get from these words. But whenever I read it, and I've read it many times over, it always, I don't want to stimulates me, but intrigues me, enchants me. That's probably the best way of putting it. So then I'd like to read just this other little passage here before maybe we can then see another little portion of the myth, beyond myth and tradition. This one is from the 50s and 60s. Again, a diary entry. For a number of days, there's a sense of extraordinary stillness. The mind is very alert, but is still. It is vigilant, but tranquil. It is empty with fullness. Out of this, the heart has become simple. In this vast, immeasurable tranquility, there is a spark so infinitesimally small that yet covers the world like that immeasurable presence, a light, a life, a love, a something that pervades the world. It is there. It's never not been here. One wonders what has prevented the realization of it. It is so amazingly clear, simple, and still. Words have no meanings anymore to express that inexpressible. And there again you have, he addresses that seeming contradiction. He talks about it, yet it's inexpressible. Right? And actually that came up, Krishnamurti and David Bohm, they had this whole series of dialogues. They started actually here. When was that? 1980, I think. And that later continued in Brockwood Park in England, and it was made into a book called The Ending of Time. Very profound exchange and inquiry into the ground of all being and the essence of the universe and all that. And they, Bohm and Krishnamurti come to this point, and Bohm says, well, it's inexpressible and beyond words, so why are you speaking? And of course, Krishnamurti had been asked this before, and he would say on previous occasions he had said, oh, you don't ask a flower why the flower spreads its perfume in the air. That's more or less what I'm doing. But on this particular occasion, he said to Bohm, when Bohm asked him, so it's inexpressible, so why are you talking and trying to put it into words? And Krishnamurti says really very simply and beautifully, he says, I want others also to have this. What? I want others, other people, also to have this, to experience this, to sense this, to see this. He wants to share it. He wants to, to the degree that he can. At the same time, he also says, nobody can give it to you. You see? Again, seeming contradiction, a conundrum, and yet so clear and simple. You have to be a light unto yourself. You have to find out for yourself. Nobody can give it to you. You see? So to just bring this, whatever you want to call my little spiel here, presentation or whatever, to a conclusion. Actually, I want to intercept before we go to the next thing, which is again, as I mentioned, beyond the power of myth and tradition, which is the section on love. Very beautiful, I should add. But just in case any of you have a question or want to comment or anything, now would be maybe the time to say something if you feel up to it. Yes?
Well, you read out these things. What was that from? You said a diary?
Yeah, yes.
Which one?
Well, it's not, as I mentioned earlier, it has not been published.
What is it?
No, there's so much material of Krishnamurti's, both recorded and others, that has not yet been published. So there's a real treasure trove there. Okay, so Eric, if you don't mind, let's put on Beyond Myth and Tradition, Evelyn Blau.
As we look at the topic of violence and its many categories, ranging from schoolyard bullying to domestic violence to apocalyptic variations of war, could I do that? Would I do that? Is there something deep within the psyche that's normally quiet or repressed, but at any given moment can come flaming out as a lynching, a spanking? Is violence only physical? Or is it also deeply psychological? Does violence have a particularly national flavor, or is it universal? As Americans, we're sadly familiar with our own heritage, the treatment of Native Americans, of slaves, of internment camps, Vietnam. Other countries have their own histories: Germany, Japan, England, Russia, China. We all have something to answer for. We look outside of ourselves to see violence in others, those who are different, not like us. They are the violent ones. Is it the self, ourselves, that is the cause of violence? Krishnamurti on the violent self.
Violence must exist as long as there is division outwardly and inwardly. Conflict is the very nature of violence. Look at it as though it was not separate from you. Greed is not separate from you. Suffering is not separate from you. Anxiety, loneliness, depression, all that is you. But our tradition, our education has said you are separate from that. Right? So, where there is separation, where there is duality, there must be conflict. Like the Jew-Arab, I'm taking that, probably you'll understand that better, between the conflict of two great powers, division and so on. So, it's you are that. You are not separate from that. The observer who says, I am violent, that observer is violence. Right? So, the observer is the observed. The thinker is the thought. Be with this thing as is. Which means you bring to it all your attention to it. Right? By analyzing, examining, that's all waste of energy. Whereas if you give your total attention, which is give all your energy to the feeling, then that feeling has total ending. The word separates, but the fact of the feeling is me. Me is my nose, my eyes, my face, my name, my character, that's me. I'm not separate from all that. Therefore, you have fundamentally erased the cause of conflict. When you are that, therefore I remain with it. And when you remain with it, hold it, you are off that, that gives you tremendous energy. And that energy dissipates, ends that violence completely. Anger, imitation, conformity, obeying, all that is part of violence. And I happen to be violent, suppose. And I see, by looking at it very carefully, the causes of it. Step by step, I see it. And I do not know how to deal with it, to eradicate the cause. So I invent the non-violence as a lever to get rid of violence. Right? So I'm escaping from a fact to non-fact. So I stop that movement when I realize I'm escaping. Then I see I'm violent. Is violence separate from me? Or I am violent? Violence is part of me, like anger is part of me. Greed is part of me. Suffering is part of me. Anxiety, pain, depression, loneliness is me. But thought has separated me from violence. I don't know if you realize. So I'm always acting on violence, suppressing it, rationalizing it, saying, finding excuses for it. But when I realize the thinker is the thought, right? The observer is the observed, then the division comes to an end. And where there is division, there must be conflict. So please follow this. I have totally eliminated conflict. The mind stops acting, but remains with it, doesn't escape from it. So when you remain with something entirely, completely, with all your attention, the thing disappears completely. The freedom from authority implies the freedom from fear. And the freedom from fear implies the cessation of every form of violence.
If we stop violence, then our fear recedes?
No, sir. It's not a question of recession, of fear. Let's put it around the other way, sir. Man is violent. Linguistically, psychologically, in daily life he is violent, which ultimately leads to war.
There's a lot of it around.
And man has accepted war as the way of life. Whether in the office, whether at home, or in the playing field, or anywhere, war is accepted as the way of life, which is the very essence of violence. Now, and aggression are all that's involved. So, as long as man accepts violence, lives a way of life which is violent, he perpetuates fear, and therefore violence, and also accepts authority.
So these three are a kind of vicious circle, each playing into the other.
And
right.
The churches say, live peaceful, be kind, and love your neighbor, which is all sheer nonsense. We can't go beyond it unless one is free from it. Not intellectually or theoretically, but actually be free from every form of authority. Not the authority of the expert, but the feeling of dependence on authority.
All right. I think
Then, is it possible for a human being to be free completely of fear? Not only at the superficial level of one's consciousness, but also at the deeper level, what's called the unconscious. Otherwise, you're bound to accept authority of anybody. You are violent. Violent is not separate from you. Is it a fact that there is an observer different from anger? Careful, don't answer. Look at it carefully. Anger is me. I'm not different from anger. Right? Violence is me. Non-violence is not me. Right? That's just an idea. The fact is unviolent. That's a fact. Non-violence is non-fact. But we pursue non-fact. Because we don't know how to deal with what is. Right? That is, I've invented non-violence. This country is full of that, non-violence. At least they talk about it. But the fact is they're violent. The fact has no duality. I would say that. I just discovered it. You understand? The fact has no opposite. I'm angry, that's a fact. But when I say I must not be angry, then duality arises. So, very interesting. I'm sure rain is going forward. So, I'm angry. That's a fact. What am I to do? I won't say I must not be angry. Then I'm in conflict. You understand? I won't suppress it. There's no suppression, there's no escape, there's no transcending it. So what happens? Go on, sir. What happens when there is no movement away from the fact? Go on. It is the movement away from it creates conflict, creates duality. And volumes have been written by clever Indians about duality. The speaker said there is no duality right from the beginning, because there is only the fact. But when I want to get over the fact, then I create duality. Right, sir? See, then what takes place? How to remain with the fact. You understand? Not move away from the fact. Any movement away from the fact is conflict and duality. So, when you remain with the fact, what takes place? You work it out. I'm working it out. But you work it. What happens when you remain with the fact? Which means what? You are, I can tell you, you will say yes, yes, and go. You don't apply. When I move away from the fact, it is a wastage of energy. Right? So when there is no movement away from the fact, all energy is there. Which means complete attention there with the fact. And when there's complete attention, then it's like light, so being high-powered light being thrown on the fact. And then the fact reveals all its content. You understand? Physical violence, killing each other, hurting each other, physically, by word, by a gesture, by a look, right? We hurt each other. And what is violence? That's also part of violence. The word, the gesture, the blow, the bayonet, the ball. So, what is right action which will encompass the whole movement of violence? Right? What is right action? Right? Which is non-action. I don't know if you follow this. Any action born of violence is violence. One country is aggressive, and you respond with aggressiveness to that country. This is what's happened. And that's positive action, which is considered positive action. You hit me, I hit you back. But seeing the whole nature of violence, observing it closely, there is only a state which is non-action. I wonder if you understand this. What is considered positive action with regard to violence in the ordinary accepted traditional sense is to retaliate. Right? This has been our tradition. We own that particular piece of land miles away, and if anybody is aggressive, enters into that land, I send all my warships to it. This is what is happening all the world over. Meet aggression by aggression. And that's considered positive, realistic action. And this has been the history of mankind for thousands of years. So when one investigates into this whole problem of violence, any movement from violence is still violence, right? If one understands this. Therefore, when there is violence, no response to violence, which is the most positive action. Please ask yourself, why do we choose psychologically, inwardly say, I will do this, I won't do that. This is right, that's wrong. I'm violent, but I must become non-violent. I have pride, but I've become humble. You understand? This inward choice going on all the time. I haven't understood the nature of violence, but I want to escape from that. Therefore, I create the ideal. So, after creating something which is not, then there is conflict between what is and what I think should be. This is what we are doing. So, I say to myself, before I achieve the other, which is non-violent, I must first understand what is violence. Violence is not only physical, but great deal, much more psychological. When I conform to a pattern, when I'm being allowed to be programmed. Understand? When you tell me what I should do because of the good of my soul or my psyche or whatever it is, and you become the authority. So when I accept authority, there is violence. You understand? I'm confused. I'm disturbed. I want certainty. And you come along, the guru, the priest, the psychologist, the others, and they become the authority. I have created them out of my confusion, my disorder. So I realize, as long as there is an authority subjectively, either the experience which I've had, the memory of that experience which becomes the authority, follow all this, or the authority of somebody who says, I know, I will tell you all about it. The nasty, ugly gurus do all this, coining money. They are one of the most rich people in the world. Your evangelists, the churches, the tremendous organizations. They say, have faith, believe, accept. And I am so frightened, I say, and gullible, I accept it. So I am creating out of my disorder authority. So, one of the causes of conflict, disorder, is psychological acceptance of authority. That means, can one live without a single ideal, single authority, so that one lives in great order now, not tomorrow?